Hello, welcome back class. Here we are on the 15th already. Today is what we're going to do is we're going to be working with a three-value pattern, or we can also use this terminology as three different planes. Planes and patterns are going to represent surfaces with values in them and how they relate to each other. If you might get confused if you go to the syllabus, it's going to say to work from a model, but today I've changed it and I'm going to have you work from a particular artist off that list, or one that would work the best for you, that would have good light, middle, and dark in it. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how to come up with a grid. So the painting that you pick online, you can print it out, and then you can put a grid over it. It'll help you to draw it quicker and be a little more accurate with it. And the idea of this, I'm not worried about as a drawing exercise to get the drawing from that artist right. The idea is to get that down and to work with the values. And so what I'm going to show you with this is a way to grid it out, and from the image and what I put up on the wall behind me. And then I am going to block out some darks, middles, and lights, and then I'm going to work with some gradations in it. And then what you're going to do is, after you watch the one online that I put in there by Steve Houston, he's going to talk a lot about gradations and relating it to art history. I need you to watch him very carefully to see what he does. It's not the best video, but if you turn it up, what he's drawing is going to be clear. What he writes maybe isn't as clear, but pay attention to it. And then in light of what I'm about to show you and what he's about to show you, you should have no problem with the project. There won't be any homework in our next class Tuesday. We are going to do the same process, but we're going to do it from a model online. So it's a little easier at the beginning to do it from another artist because it becomes clearer. So I'm going to take you so far with this, with the gradations. You'll be able to, again, watch that video. So what I have here is a painting by Renoir. And this painting by Renoir, I put a grid over it, and it's this grid that I want to talk about, okay? So that grid that we're looking at, there's a simple way of laying it out. And when I get out of your way in a minute, you'll see it on the wall behind me. But just to be absolute sure that you understand this kind of way of working with a grid, because you don't have to measure anything out. You can use a ruler, starts off with an X, and you break that down, and you continue. You're not putting boxes over it. This is an illustration method of doing it. So when you look at the image now behind me, this Renoir is now here, the same thing. And so I've blown it up quite a bit. So the way the grid's going to work is like this. So I'm going to do a little schematic drawing here of it, of how I came up with that. So what you're doing is you're coming up with your frame of reference. Now your frame of reference is extremely specific. So what I did here before I turned this video on is I measured this distance into this distance, okay? And I came up with that relationship. It's real close to this picture, blown up. It's not perfect, and yours doesn't need to be perfect either. So I just measured this, watched my distance, and it was about a quarter difference, and then I measured down, I did this, came up with my equal parts. So this frame of reference now has to be what your image is that you're doing, okay? Once you have that frame of reference, then you begin to make a line from corner to corner. Now, I'm not going to use a ruler on this. I did use a yardstick on this so that this is done quite accurate. So anyways, you do this, it gives us our center. Then you're going to come and you're going to come up with your halfway. You're going to run down the center. So unlike a grid where you measure off inches or quarter inches, this goes really quick. So now you've got this divided, if you look at it in a way of quarters. So here's our halfway X. So I'm going to take this box with a diagonal and I'm going to cross it over. This box, I'm going to take it and cross it over. You should follow along as I do this, because it's going to start to build up on lines and it might get to be a little confusing if you've never done it. So the same thing here. I'm just going from corner to corner. So in a way, is what I have now is 4 boxes with an X in it, if you want to think of it that way. Now is what we're going to do is we're going to take the center of these, and I'm going to come through the center, and I'm going to try to get these close. I know they're going to be crooked because I'm standing off to the side, and you can never get them right that way. So you're coming down the center. So this is the next move, and now is what I did up here, if you can see them together, is what I did is I ran a line this way through the center of the X's, and I ran a line through the center of the X's. Now, normally for most prints, this could be enough, okay? Now, for me, there was a little more detail in this area, so is what I did is I started to break it down a little further. So is what I can do, and what I did there, is I can see these now as boxes, and I could do this. I can cross over this way, I could cross over, and this can go indefinite. I can break these down really small. So that's what I did here. I put a series of X's through it, because I was trying to figure out how low is the chin, and without this division in there, I mean, you can guess at it, but I'm just trying to get it as close as we can through using this method. So I did that. I ran that through, and I ran this through, which broke up this box into a half. And if there's small details, eventually I could keep breaking it down. I could break that down. I could put a center line and come up with 4 little boxes and break those down. So the nice thing about this method is what illustrators have done is this is a way to transfer. And wherever the details are, they can just break it down more in that area and keep it sparse in another area, rather than putting a bunch of boxes. So that's the way it starts. From there, you're going to, then it becomes pretty easy. I watch, and if you can see this, I watch how far this is from that construction line. This had overlapped a little bit. This came down a little bit. Okay, so you kind of get the idea. And so you use this as a grid in order to place what's in front of it. So that's the first step, okay? The next step is what we're going to do is as I talked about in class when I saw you, and a lot of you did it on your last one with 3 values, is what you're going to do is put a little scale up here of the 3 values you're going to use. So is what I might do just to make this a little easier. I don't know if hopefully you might be able to see it, but I'm going to pin this up here so that you get a little bit of an idea of what I'm thinking when I'm doing it. So the background for me, I'm going to say, is light. The light we never use as a white because we want to be able to erase and build towards a light. So I'm going to say this is light, this is light, this is the same light. Of course, they're not white, but it's the lights that he's using. So this value that's actually on this piece of paper is what I'm going to use. And the fan that he has is white. So now I got to find my darks and middle tones. So the outfit she's wearing is more to the middle tone because of the dark he's using here and here, and a few darks underneath. So middle tone, middle tone. He uses some middle tones through here, which I'll probably use and connect as a passage. And technically the hands could fall into a middle tone, but I'm going to keep them grouped into a light. And these are the decisions you've got to make on yours. Is this better to be a middle or a light? In this context, if this is my middle, getting rid of my dark, then this is darker than that, so this becomes my light. And so you got to make those choices because up here, there are closely related middle tones like these, and there's closely related lights, but they're not the same. And that's why we call it value grouping. You're taking all those values, and now you're trying to come up with an idea of those 3. So that's what I'm going to do as my idea. So is what I'm going to do is start here, and I'm going to begin to lay in a middle tone. So these grid lines, this is all done, by the way, with Vine charcoal. So if you do it with Vine charcoal, all these lines are just going to easily disappear. So I'm going to watch my diagram, and I'm going to take this whole area. I'm not going to worry about divisions in between. I'm just going to get rid of everything. As I look at this, there's a couple lines I didn't use, which I'm going to place in right now in order to place that dark shape in its right place. A couple lines I left out. So I'm just going to quickly take my time and lay them in so it looks like it's about here. That's the darker shape that's in there. And underneath the fan, I do want to come up with that area so I know kind of where it is. Okay. So anyways, now we're on our way. So this, I'm going to take the vine charcoal. When it's rubbed, it's going to get lighter. So I'm going to come around the light area and bring this up to where he's got the light. I'm going to build this in here. I was going to lay this all out ahead of time, but then you wouldn't see what happened underneath. So this will take a few minutes to get it blocked out. So it's kind of like a coloring book at this point. You're just laying out big shapes. Now I'm going to connect things together. This and this, you can see the two different colors are the same value, so I'm going to get rid of my edge. I could come back and place it in there, but I am going to link them together. And this sleeve, for the most part, is mostly light. I am going to leave mostly middle tone. I am going to leave a light or two within that area. So there's going to be my middle tone. Now, so what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to start this as a middle tone, and I'm going to go over it darker. Because you want to put the vine charcoal underneath. So now I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go with the dark. And as we talked about, I have to be really careful. And yours is going to do the same. It's going to look real gritty. But when I rub it, it's going to get very dark. And I am wanting to avoid black, because otherwise when we go and work with gradations, those gradations are not going to show up. So now when I look at it, I can build it a little heavier. And I'm going to build that in a little bit. I'm going to get on the other side. So you're coming up with a dark. Take your time with the shapes. So I want to place the dark so that I can see it up against the middle tone. Because values are always about relationships. So because of the size of this, I'm going to show you part of it. Because I want to do something with a little bit of gradations. On the tape that you're going to look at by Steve Houston, he's going to talk in depth about it. I just want to show it to you in its bigger context. So anyways, we're going to watch edges. These edges eventually will be kind of sharp, so you'll construct them as you go. I would rub this in a little bit. So now I do have a middle tone. I do have a dark, and that was my concern of trying to come up with that. Okay. With this, I'm going to place in a middle tone. So I'm going to show you this lower part, and then I'm going to do something quickly with her hair, and a little bit with the fan, and a little bit with the face. And I'll show you a couple gradations. So all of this goes together. Her arm now disappears. Again, if you want to hold on to it, feel free to put a line in there, like we did with the two values if you're afraid of it disappearing. But you want to make this value even, okay? But give yourself a little suggestion if it makes you feel more comfortable. I'm going to do that just so that I know roughly where it's at. This is going to connect through. Again, the edges are going to become important. Eventually, it's going to be a very sharp edge here. up against the top of the fan. As the fan, these edges here where the black dark meets the shoulder, they're not sharp at all. They're very soft. He keeps it sharp in places here, and he keeps it very soft here. So keep watching your edges. Sharp edge, soft edge. Middle tones, working our way down. Trying to bring out the fan a little bit, so I'm trying to do this area. The background, I'm going to get rid of the grid lines and just keep it a value before we put anything in with a grid or with a gradation. Good. So what I'm going to do is take her hair. I'm going to take the vine charcoal. I'm going to get rid of the little part that I put. We can erase that out. I use that as a guideline when I was drawing it out. Watch these bangs on her hair. I edited them because there's going to be a gradation under there. I would put them on top later. So any detail, try to get rid of that way if it's going to be something on top of something else. The features of the face, I laid them in to figure out the face. But, I mean, you could work with gradations first and then put them in. So I'm going to rub this a little bit. And now we're going to work a little bit darker because I got to get this to a dark value. I'm going to shape it just a little better as I place it. Again, I'm pressing on the charcoal a little bit as we're doing down here. When I rub it, it should build it to a pretty dark value, avoiding a black. So again, this phase of it takes time. It's like doing a coloring book and filling in shapes. And we get a little bit of dark here. I don't want to miss that. It's part of his design. Small shape. Hopefully I can get it in. If you have little blending sticks, they can help. Because what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it roughly like that. So it's just definitely darker than this. And then I'm going to take a mid-tone that I see, and I'm going to connect it to the side of her neck this way, and down the inside of this collar, and coming up the side of her face like this. So there's a mid-tone in there. You want to watch those patterns, and that has a soft edge, and up against the light of the collar is what happens is it has a sharp edge. This will gradate into the neck this way. This eventually will fade up into the face, eventually going that way. So play around with those edges, trying to get them right. But anyways, the mid-tone's going to help a lot in there. I'm going to move down and do this, and then I'm going to place on some big gradations. So this middle tone comes down to about here. Her hands are light. So anyways, you get all these bigger values placed. I am going to get rid of the grid out of here, so it just becomes a unified shape of a predominant light. So when we work with the gradations, it'll make them a little more visible. In this area, I'm going to try to speed up the process a little bit, just add a dark to this paper, see what happens. doesn't work well, so I'm going to go into it with the vine charcoal. So again, these negative spaces, as they would be called, are the space around the fan. You want to get that value in there, and I want this value to be lighter, so I've got to build this a little more. Once I get this, I'm going to show you a few gradations, and again, you'll be watching the tape with Steve Houston that I have there, and he's going to go into those gradations in great depth. So anyways, you want those three values to be visible. As they move here, they're soft transitions, up against the bottom of the fan, very sharp. So again, keep watching your edges and our bigger values. Okay, so now, is what happens with these gradations. When we look at the face of the model, I have to come over and get myself an eraser. Thought I had one. When we look at the face of the model here, is what's happening is, it might be hard to see, but it's lighter at the top and a little bit darker as it goes down. A lot of that will happen with faces. Artists will do that a lot. So is what I want to do then is take the top of this, and on this paper, yours will work better than this paper, that's for sure. And I'm going to lighten it up here. I didn't put any eyebrows on her or anything yet. And this would gradate down. And so you get it light. So now I'm going to bring it back to my light. And this is going to gradate as it goes down. It's going to gradate a little bit darker and darker. And so just getting that a little lighter makes it a little darker into the orbital area. As this fades up against her cheek here, there'd be a little bit of light and it would fade out. So then it goes from a gradation from a little lighter to a little darker to the mid-tone that I put in. There'd be a little bit of light through the bridge of the nose. Probably not as light as I made it up here. Okay, so this would be your lightest, and you could remember you can work with some pretty strong lights. I would try to get this contrast pretty strong. As that builds, under the nose would get to be a little bit lighter, but not much. The chin, I'm going to get rid of these lines. It wouldn't hardly have any light on it, so that this would remain my lightest. These lines, I'm going to try to edit them out of there a little bit. So it would do something like that. Underneath this mid-tone that I was putting in, I would have to work with it a little more, soften the edge. Into these mid-tones, they would get a little darker. I'm going to use a soft charcoal pencil on a small area. These middle tones would get a little darker and they would gradate in to the form a little bit when I look at it. So this stuff is subtle now. It's going from a little darker to a little lighter, but it's a mid-tone. In there, we begin to find out roughly where is that eyebrow. And I'm using the dark charcoal pencil, but you might start it a little lighter than I'm starting it, would be a better bet. And then you would shape that and you put it over. So now that we got a lighter value there, and gradually coming down, we've got a darker value there. I'm not going to develop this whole head, but what will happen is the shapes of the hair will now cross the forehead. I'm going to put them in with vine charcoal first. So now you would design these shapes as nice as we could get them, the way Renoir is thinking of them. He's thinking of everything as a design. So those shapes would placed, because now you got sharp darks up against the light of the forehead, and it's a better way to do it, to get the light underneath it first before you go in the other direction. The hair, if we really look at it, I know it'd be hard for you to see under the lighting, but for me, it gets black here. It's very dark. So now I'm going to gradate the hair from dark into my lighter dark, which is already there existing. So now I'm going to press, and I'm going to build this, and I'm going to rub it. So now I'm trying to get to my extremes. We laid in the average dark. Now I'm going to go for my darkest dark. Wherever the edges are sharp, like around the top of that ear, I would try to maintain. And I'm going to build this, keep the gradation where it's darker to a lighter dark, moving into my lightest, going up there. This side, the same thing is taking place. It gets it really dark there and gradates it up, moving in this direction. So I'm lifting up on the pressure of the compressed charcoal, and then I'm going to rub it. So you're trying to, gradation, of course, is where it's going from darker to lighter to lighter. And so you're trying to get that in there. So that's what's going to start to add our form. And this still isn't working with a lot of detail. It's just putting in gradations. So I'm going to take the eraser, and I'm going to find that light spot on her hair that I had gotten rid of, the part of her hair. And now I'm going to place that. And so then erase it down and come up. It's got very soft edges, so I tried to press a little harder on the edge on the back part and fading it out in the front. You want to get used to experimenting with that eraser. With the background here, he makes it darker because he's going to soften this area. He keeps it lighter here. So what I'm going to do is look for those subtle gradations. This negative space is important, but we've got to be real careful this value doesn't jump too far into another value range. So I can go a little darker here, and that's going to start making these areas a little bit lighter around the head as you start to notice. It's real subtle. This starts to get a little lighter now. He tones this down, and again, Steve Houston will talk a lot about this. We don't want the eye to go here, so he tones it down ever so little, keeping his lighter areas here. You might use a little value in other places around the head. Renoir was incredibly creative with this stuff. He's softening the head at this point. I didn't use any compressed charcoal there. I should have a little. The vine charcoal will totally disappear. He softens it where it's sharper here than here. And so I'm trying to pick up on the same thing. This side of the head, if you notice, he tones it down ever so little. And he tones it down. Why? Because he's going to bring out the light of that cheek. And so he pushes it in, and there's light areas on the collar. So these are the gradations. You're working with these subtle changes. He gets it real light out here, but as it goes down, it darkens. So down here, he's dark, making it a little darker of a gradation. So I'm going to do that. So what does that do when you look at it, when this light becomes a little darker? It harmonizes the shoulder a little bit more, but then he's going to pull it out. So there's a slight softening, a transition here. Those are some of the gradations back there. Now, on the arm is what happens is he begins to go darker here along the edge. And so I'm going to watch that edge and go a little bit darker. And then watch, really rub it a lot. I got to make sure it doesn't turn black, but I'm going to gradate it in. And he runs that dark all the way up to here. And he puts a little bit of it in here as it moves, as the tones change now a little on the side of the neck. So as that builds a little darker, we also have the luxury of taking our middle tone and going a little lighter. So I can now go a little lighter in the middle. And so as I go a little lighter is what's going to happen. You're going to see a light, a middle, and a dark mid-tone. This is still a mid-tone that I'm using along the edge. because it's lighter than this, okay? So that's going to be the idea. I can go back into it now and say, where does the arm separate? And so just come up with your placement, and I'm going to place that in. It's not working too well, this charcoal on this paper, building it. It should work well on yours. You shouldn't have a problem. But anyways, he begins to separate the arm, and the same begins to happen. Take your chamois, and up against the dark, he begins to go a little bit lighter of a mid-tone, but they got to be in the mid-tone range, okay? And so you're going to build that drawing in that sense. Now I'm going to add a little bit of, I'm going to go to the extreme, the way he's doing, and then I'm going to add a few lights to the collar and a little bit to the fan, and then I'm going to leave this. So he builds some extreme darks in here, and especially up against the fan. Now I'm not going to take the time to build in these details of the edge of the fan, but I would have you do that on yours. If it goes in and out a little bit as a fan, this is where I would start to suggest at those details. So I'm going to do it a very little, gradate it up. And so then you come up with a real sharp edge there, okay? So always focus on the edge, focus on the edge. And with your charcoal, I'm going to build this in. As the dark moves to the left, it fades. And this fades the way that I've got it. And then he gets a little separation with the arm. I got some charcoal on my finger, so I'm just going to make it a little darker that way. And he gradates it in. Now, it's always better in something to rather having a line there like what I just did. If it melts together, we then just come back at this stage and work with the value separation. Then you don't have a line, you got a value edge. Now this value edge up against the fan is not as strong as this one. And so he varies it. Here, at the turn of the arm, he picks it up and makes it strong again. So the fan doesn't look like a cutout. The edges are going to vary from darker at some places and lighter at other places. Puts a little bit of dark in here and separates the arm. So it doesn't take much, and it starts to open up and become three-dimensional, okay? On the fan is what he's going to do is it's lighter here and darker here. Again, with this paper, I have much limitations. Up against the wall, it's all choppy. Yours won't. So what he's going to do here is he's going to get this real light. And so what you do is go back, make that edge sharp, and you make it real light and gradate it the way he's doing it. Gradates it down. And as it goes this way, as you can see, you don't get the light. It stays the darker light. So I'm just going to gradate it so it looks like there's some depth starting to happen to it. So this is the first, you get your bigger values, you start to work with the gradations, and the next stage on top of this, which we're not going to go, but when we get there in a few weeks, is what we're going to do is then begin to build details on top of all of this, more details. So down here, he gradates it up, going a little darker, and he places other areas because of the coloration. So I'm going to swatch those in a little bit, just to add a little bit more variation, not much. So as you get those little changes to the major shape, our major shape stays a unified shape. These value changes are not dividing it so that it fragments away into our background. It keeps it real clean and clear and separated. And you're going to need to keep thinking of yours the same way. In the collar, I'm going to do a little bit, and then I'm going to stop at that point. With the collar, he's got this light collar she's wearing. So what I want to do is separate that from her neck, so the neck looks a little bit darker of a light. So I'm going to go in there, and this is where you would separate those lights. See, at the beginning, you link them, and now we separate them, and you come up with nice edges when you separate them, because I can press hard, come up with a sharp separation. I can let the eraser fade out. But I'm going to lighten this area up a bit just so you can see it. I know it'll probably be hard in the video. So there he comes up with a real strong light, trying to play his contrast against their skin tone. And now we see that we got this lighter than the values down here. It gradually builds and becomes almost that light up there, but not as much. And so through the middle of these middles, if I can get a little bit of a light, but keep the middle around it. So I want the light, the middle, the dark, so it takes on a little bit of a depth. And the same in here. I'm going to place in a few light shapes. We'll put one there, and we'll come with one here. I know it's hard to see this, but I'm using what he's doing and just kind of suggesting it where a little bit of the light might be. Sometimes it doesn't take a lot. A little will go a long ways. So there's a lot of other subtleties in here, but I think all of you get the idea. So is what you'll do is set yours up this way, get it laid out. Definitely watch the Steve Houston video. He's going to take you into much detail of these gradations. Pay attention to them. It's a little hard to hear, I know. And I will see you in the next video.